The fluorescent lights of the courthouse hallway flickered with a sound so subtle that only Sarah's heightened, exhausted nervous system could detect it. She'd been running on adrenaline and grief for so long that her body had developed new sensitivities. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could feel the microscopic tremor in her hands that betrayed everything she was trying to contain. 47 days, she'd counted each one. Day 1, the moment Marcus's lawyer had served her with papers, and her hands had gone numb reading words like unfit, erratic, unstable environment. Day 23, when the judge had granted him temporary custody and she'd watched her 3-year-old daughter walk out of the courthouse holding her father's hand, that small hand getting smaller and smaller as they moved away. Day 47, today, the day everything either changed or ended. Sarah shifted Maya's weight on her hip. The child weighed maybe 30 pounds, but at this moment she felt like she was carrying an entire universe. All of Sarah's hope, all of her worth as a human being, all of her identity as a mother. It was compressed into this small body that was currently warm and damp from an anxious car ride to the courthouse. "Mommy, my tummy hurts," Maya whispered, her voice small and uncertain. She did this now. Started sentences mid-thought as if she wasn't sure anyone was listening, as if her words might disappear if she said them too quietly. Sarah's chest cracked a little more. "I know, baby girl, I know it does." She pressed a kiss to the top of her daughter's head, inhaling that distinctive toddler smell, a mixture of apple juice, sleep, and something indefinably innocent. This smell terrified her, because what if she didn't get to smell it every day? What if someone came along and told her that this scent, this child, this fundamental piece of her own heart, now belonged to someone else? Patricia Morrison was already inside the courtroom, Sarah knew, probably reviewing her case file for the 100th time. Patricia was a fighter, the kind of lawyer who didn't just defend her clients, she defended the things they loved most in the world. She'd taken Sarah's case pro bono, which had both relieved and terrified Sarah. Relieved because she couldn't afford the $400 per hour lawyers that Marcus's family could throw at this. Terrified because it meant Patricia believed in her case so strongly that she was willing to do it for free. And free meant desperate. Desperate meant Sarah really might lose. Sarah found a wooden bench in the hallway and sat down, settling Maya against her chest. The little girl immediately began to cry, not the dramatic, performative crying of a tantrum, but the quiet, hopeless crying of a child who'd learned that noise only made things worse. That sound broke something in Sarah that had somehow managed to stay intact through all of this. "I want to go home," Maya said. "I want my room. I want my bed with the stars." Sarah had painted glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling of Maya's bedroom 6 months ago, before all of this had started, before Marcus had shown his true self, before the custody paperwork had arrived like a bomb. Maya had picked out which stars went where, and they'd lain on the carpet afterward, staring up at the ceiling, and Sarah had told her daughter that those stars would always be there. That home would always be there. "We're going home," Sarah promised, and the lie tasted like blood, because she didn't know if they were. That was the real horror of this situation, the absolute uncertainty. She could make promises, but she had no power to keep them. The heavy doors to the courtroom loomed at the end of the hallway, and Sarah could see through the small windows that the room was filling up. Journalists, probably. Court observers. The curious public who came to watch other people's lives get picked apart like roadkill. There was a spectacle to custody battles that Sarah had never understood until she was the one being spectacled. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister, Alina, who was sitting in the gallery. "You've got this. Maya needs you. We all know it." Sweet, useless, but sweet. Sarah had lost her job at the hospital 2 weeks into this nightmare. Not because she'd done anything wrong, her work had been flawless as always, but because the stress had shown in her face, in her voice, in the way she'd snapped at a resident who'd made a minor mistake. And the hospital, being run by people who understood the power of optics, had quietly suggested she take medical leave. It was a euphemism. It was protection, theirs, not hers. So she'd lost her job. her confidence, her ability to pay her bills without help from her parents. And then the court psych evaluation had come back with comments about her emotional stability being questionable, which was a clinical way of saying, maybe this woman is unfit to raise a child. Never mind that the questioning during that evaluation had been designed to trip her up. Never mind that the psychologist, Dr. Nathan Fields, a man with dead eyes and a breathing problem who seemed to have already made up his mind before Sarah walked into his office, had spent 45 minutes asking her about her sex life, her dating history, her coping mechanisms, as if any of it mattered to her ability to feed her daughter or love her or read her bedtime stories. Never mind that Marcus's lawyer had met with Dr. Fields 3 days before the evaluation, a fact that Patricia had uncovered only through fortunate timing and a loose-lipped courthouse clerk. Never mind all of that. The evidence was in, and it was damning. Or at least it looked damning if you read it without context. If you didn't know Sarah, if you didn't understand that she'd been raising Maya alone for 3 years after Marcus had decided that parenthood wasn't as fun as he'd thought it would be, that she'd worked doubles to afford childcare, that she'd literally taken a bullet for her daughter, not literally, obviously, but close enough. She'd sacrificed everything, and now the system was deciding that her sacrifices weren't enough. "Mommy," Maya's voice pulled her back, "is Daddy going to take me away?" Sarah's entire body went cold. This was the question she'd been dreading. The question that revealed that her daughter had internalized all of this chaos and struggle and understood, on some deep level, that she was at the center of a war that she didn't understand and couldn't control. "No," Sarah said, and she injected everything she had into that single word. Every ounce of certainty, every fragment of conviction, every desperate hope. "No, baby, you're going to stay with Mommy. That's what today is about. That's what the judge is going to decide." But even as she said it, doubt gnawed at her. The judge, Harrison, a man in his 60s with reading glasses and a reputation for being tough on soft issues, which was a euphemism for not caring much about things like emotional well-being, had already ruled once, and it had gone against her. Second rulings could go either way, but they usually favored the existing order. It was easier for judges to maintain their own decisions than to reverse them. She could lose again. The thought was so loud in her head that she almost couldn't hear anything else. Patricia emerged from the courtroom, found her in the hallway, and her expression told Sarah everything she needed to know. This was it. The moment. The final push before the judge decided who got to keep being Maya's mother. "It's time," Patricia said, and she placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder with a firmness that suggested she understood exactly how close to breaking Sarah was. "Don't cry in there. Don't get angry. Don't let them see anything except a woman who loves her daughter enough to be still and quiet and let the truth do the work." Sarah nodded. She gathered Maya, who'd fallen into that strange half-sleep that children enter when they're exhausted by emotion. She smoothed her daughter's hair, checked her own reflection in her phone camera. The face looking back was not the face she recognized. It was gaunt, haunted, desperate. It was a woman who'd been slowly disappearing over the course of 47 days. "One more time," Patricia said, "and then it's over. One way or another, it's over today." As they walked toward the courtroom doors, Sarah realized that Patricia was wrong. Even if they won today, it wouldn't be over. Custody battles didn't end. They just changed shape. They became homework assignments and visitation schedules, and the constant, gnawing fear that the other parent was poisoning your child against you, filling their head with lies and doubts and reasons to resent you. But as the bailiff opened the heavy doors and Sarah stepped inside with her daughter, she also understood that it didn't matter what came next. What mattered was this moment, this fight. This refusal to let Marcus Webb's lawyers and his family's money and the court system's indifference take away the only thing that made her life worth living. The judge was already seated, his expression impassive, his fingers steepled in front of him in a gesture that Sarah recognized from the previous hearing. It was his "I've already decided this" pose. And then Patricia whispered, "Trust Luna. The dog doesn't lie, and judges understand that even if they won't admit it." Sarah took her seat, her daughter heavy and warm against her side. The hearing was about to begin. And somewhere in the hallway, Officer James Martinez was leading a golden retriever toward the courtroom, a dog who had no idea she was about to change everything. The courtroom smelled like old wood and floor wax, and something else, the metallic tang of anxiety that seemed to emanate from everyone in the room except the judge. Judge Harrison sat elevated on his bench like a general surveying a battlefield, his gray suit matching his gray hair, his expression locked in the neutral mask that judges spent years perfecting. Sarah had learned to read judges by their eyes, and his eyes said, "I've already made up my mind. You're here as a formality." Marcus Webb sat at the opposing table, looking immaculate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Sarah's entire monthly rent. His hair was perfect. His posture was perfect. He had the kind of effortless confidence that only came from a lifetime of people taking him seriously simply because he existed. His two attorneys flanked him like sharks, Richard Stratton, the bulldog who'd done most of the character assassination, and Jennifer Chu, a younger woman with sharp features and sharper instincts. Jennifer was the dangerous one. Richard was all noise. Jennifer was all precision. Sarah sat across from them with Patricia beside her and Maya wedged between them both, small and terrified, and far too aware that something momentous was happening. The little girl's legs didn't touch the ground. Her feet swung in the empty space beneath the chair, a physical manifestation of her helplessness. Sarah could feel the tremor in Maya's body, that constant vibration of a child running on fear and confusion. The gallery was packed. Alina sat in the third row, her knuckles white as she gripped the bench. Sarah's parents were there too, her mother with tissues already clutched in her hand, her father's jaw so tight it looked like it might crack. There were journalists, at least a dozen, their cameras and notebooks creating an atmosphere of spectacle that made Sarah's stomach turn. This was entertainment for them. This was a story. For Sarah, this was her life. And then the side door opened. Officer James Martinez came through first. He was a man in his 50s, weathered and calm, the kind of cop who'd seen enough of life's tragedy to understand when something mattered. He wore his uniform with the unconscious ease of someone who'd inhabited the role for decades. But it was the creature on the leash beside him that stopped everything. Luna was exactly as Patricia had described her. A golden retriever, maybe 7 years old, with a coat the color of honey and eyes that seemed to contain a kind of patient wisdom. She moved through the courtroom not with the nervous energy of an animal in a strange place, but with the deliberate, measured pace of someone who'd been trained for exactly this moment. Her vest, navy blue with white lettering that read Emotional Response Canine, was professional, official, undeniable. Judge Harrison's eyes narrowed behind his glasses. "I granted this," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "I actually agreed to this." Richard Stratton stood with the velocity of a man about to launch an objection, but Patricia was faster. She stood too, blocking his trajectory slightly, her body language a subtle message. "Don't even think about it." "Your Honor," Patricia began, her voice warm but purposeful. "As previously established in our motion, the presence of the certified emotional response canine is designed to provide objective data regarding the emotional state of the minor. The dog has been specifically trained to respond to signs of trauma, anxiety, and distress. Her behavior will be entirely subjective," Richard interrupted, finally getting his words out. "Your Honor, this is precisely the kind of emotional manipulation that we've come to expect from the defense. A dog cannot testify. A dog cannot." "A dog cannot lie," Patricia said quietly. It was a simple statement, delivered with the kind of calm certainty that filled the courtroom with something almost like silence. Not quiet. There were still ambient sounds, the shifting of bodies in seats, the whisper of papers, the hum of the courthouse machinery, but a quality of attention that made everyone lean in slightly. Luna had reached her position near Sarah's table, and Officer Martinez was settling her into a down stay with a quiet hand signal. The dog complied immediately, her body relaxing into the floor with the ease of an animal who understood her job. As she settled, something extraordinary happened. Her dark eyes, intelligent, warm, patient, found Maya. Sarah felt her daughter's entire body shift. The constant tremor that had characterized Maya's existence for the past 6 weeks seemed to quiet, not disappear. Sarah was too much a nurse, too much a student of trauma, to believe that tension could vanish so quickly, but modulate, like someone turning down the volume on a sound that had been playing constantly. "Your Honor," Judge Harrison said, and his tone was different now, slightly less certain, "we will proceed with the witness testimony. The canine will remain in place unless and until she becomes disruptive. If the animal shows any sign of stress or unusual behavior, I will terminate this immediately." "Understood, officer." "Understood, Your Honor," Martinez replied. He took a position to the side, his posture the perfect picture of professional observation. But Sarah saw something in his face, a kind of recognition, as if he'd seen this exact moment happen before, as if he knew what Luna was about to do. Patricia began with her opening questions, the procedural stuff. Sarah's employment history, her housing situation, the stability of her living arrangement. These were the foundational blocks that would form the base of their case, evidence that Sarah was not, in fact, the chaotic wreck that Marcus's lawyers had portrayed her as. But Sarah barely heard the questions. Her entire focus was on the space between herself and Luna, and the way her daughter was responding to that space. Maya had stopped swinging her feet, had stopped that anxious fidgeting that had become her constant state. Her hand, which had been gripping Sarah's thigh with almost painful intensity, had relaxed slightly. And her breathing, Sarah could feel it against her side, could sense the rhythm of it, had slowed. Patricia's voice continued, a steady cadence of questions and answers. "Ms. Chen, can you describe your daily routine with Maya before the temporary custody arrangement was implemented?" Sarah answered, and the words came from someplace deeper than conscious thought. "I wake up at 6. I make breakfast, usually oatmeal or eggs, something with protein. Maya likes fruit. Blueberries are her favorite. We have breakfast together. I do my best to make it a calm time, even when I know I have a shift at the hospital." This was when things usually got tense for Sarah, when she talked about her work schedule, about the fact that she was a single working mother. It sounded like neglect if you twisted it the right way. It sounded like ambition at the expense of motherhood. But Patricia had coached her, own the narrative, be specific, make them see the love in the details. "I pack her lunch the night before," Sarah continued. "She goes to daycare 3 days a week when I'm working. Mrs. Patterson, that's her daycare provider, has known Maya since she was 3 months old. They have a very strong bond. On my days off, we're together. We go to the park. We read. We dance in the living room to music that Maya picks out. She likes songs about animals and colors and things that don't make sense but make her laugh." And this is when Sarah noticed something that would later be analyzed by child psychologists and discussed in custody reform seminars. Luna's tail had started to wag. Not with excitement, not with the frantic, full-body movement of a dog greeting someone she loves, but with a steady, rhythmic motion that seemed to synchronize with the steadiness in Sarah's voice. It was as if the dog was confirming, "Yes, this is right. This is safe. This is a child who has been loved." Richard Stratton's jaw tightened visibly. "Your Honor," he said, "the movement of the animal could be interpreted as a response to any number of stimuli. The temperature in the room, the sound of voices. This proves nothing except that dogs move." Judge Harrison held up a hand. "Proceed, Ms. Morrison." Patricia turned to Sarah with a question that had been coached and recoached. "Ms. Chen, during the month of the temporary custody arrangement, has Maya expressed any concerns or anxieties about her living situation with her father?" This was the critical moment. This was where the case could pivot, because Sarah could describe her conversations with Maya. She could detail the way her daughter had started wetting the bed again, something she'd stopped doing 18 months prior. She could describe the nights when Maya woke up screaming from nightmares she couldn't articulate. She could describe the way her daughter's personality had shifted, how the bright, talkative girl had become cautious and quiet, as if she was carefully measuring each word. But before Sarah could answer, something happened that nobody had anticipated. Maya's small hand reached out, not toward her mother but toward Luna. It was such a simple gesture, a 3-year-old reaching toward an animal that radiated calm. But in that moment, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Officer Martinez didn't move. Patricia didn't move. Even Judge Harrison's perpetually moving pen paused. Luna's response was immediate and trained and utterly, perfectly clear. She didn't jump up, didn't surge forward with enthusiasm. Instead, she slowly shifted her weight, closing the distance between herself and the small child by only a matter of inches. Her body language communicated absolute safety, absolute acceptance. Maya's hand made contact with the dog's fur. And for the first time in 6 weeks, Sarah's daughter smiled. It wasn't a large smile, wasn't the exuberant, gap-toothed grin that Maya used to offer to the world when she was content and secure. But it was real. It was genuine. It was the smile of a child who, in the presence of another being, felt safe enough to let her guard down. The courtroom erupted, but quietly, in the way that courtrooms do when they're witnessing something that might be changing the entire shape of the proceedings. Journalists were already scribbling notes. Elena had her hand over her mouth. Judge Harrison was staring at the interaction with an expression that Sarah couldn't quite read. And then Patricia asked the question that would change everything. Ms. Chen, given what we're seeing right now, given the visible physiological change in your daughter's demeanor, in the presence of an animal specifically trained to detect trauma, what would you say this tells us about Maya's emotional state during her time with her father? Richard Stratton shot to his feet. Objection, the witness cannot. But Judge Harrison silenced him with a look. Let her answer. Sarah took a breath. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her. At the way Maya's body had relaxed. At the way the tight knot of fear that had lived in her child's chest for 6 weeks seemed to have loosened, just slightly, in the presence of an animal who asked nothing of her except to be. And Sarah said the thing she'd been rehearsing in her head for weeks, but had been too afraid to say out loud. It tells me that my daughter has been living with anxiety and fear. It tells me that her nervous system has been in constant hypervigilance. It tells me that a neutral, safe presence is enough to shift her physiology because she hasn't had enough of that. And it breaks my heart to know that. The courtroom went completely quiet. Even Luna seemed to sense the weight of the moment. She rested her head on the edge of the bench where Maya sat, a gesture of absolute, unconditional support. And then, just as Patricia was about to ask another question, Maya did something that nobody in that courtroom expected. She opened her mouth and spoke directly to the dog, as if no one else was in the room. "Thank you for being nice to me," she whispered. The moment Maya's small voice faded into the courtroom silence. "Thank you for being nice to me." Something shifted in the air itself. A palpable change in atmospheric pressure that made several people in the gallery visibly uncomfortable. It was the kind of moment where time seemed to compress, where cause and effect became immediately, unavoidably clear to anyone with eyes to see and a conscience to feel. Richard Stratton felt it. Sarah could see it in the way his face flushed, in the way his fingers clenched and unclenched around his pen. He was a lawyer trained to control narratives, to shape testimony into whatever architecture served his client's interests. But he couldn't control a 3-year-old girl thanking a dog for kindness. He couldn't litigate away the obvious implication. That Maya was so starved for gentleness that she had to express gratitude to an animal for offering what should have been freely available from her own father. Patricia Morrison didn't move. She stood perfectly still, understanding that the case had just shifted beneath their feet, that they'd been given a gift that transcended strategy or tactics, a gift of pure, unmanipulated truth. Judge Harrison was making notes, not the quick, cursory notes he'd been making throughout the proceedings, but careful, deliberate notes. His expression had changed. The neutral mask had developed a crack. Sarah could see something behind it now, doubt, real doubt, the kind of doubt that comes from witnessing something that contradicted your assumptions. But it was Marcus Webb's reaction that told Sarah the most. He was staring at his daughter with an expression that cycled through several distinct emotions in the span of 3 seconds. First, there was shock, genuine surprise that Maya had said anything at all, that she'd acknowledged the dog's presence in a way that moved beyond simple interaction into gratitude, into some kind of emotional recognition. Then came something that looked almost like shame, though Marcus's face was trained to suppress shame the way a tennis player's serves are trained to have spin. The shame flickered across his features like a shadow and was gone. What replaced it was worse. What replaced it was calculation. Sarah knew that look. She'd seen it before, late at night in the months before Marcus had left her. It was the look of a man reallocating resources, of someone recalibrating their strategy because the old one wasn't working. His eyes shifted from Maya to his attorneys, and Jennifer Chu seemed to receive some kind of silent signal because her entire posture changed. "Objection," Richard Stratton said, and this time his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Your Honor, what just occurred was an emotional manipulation designed specifically to prejudice this court against my client. The witness arranged for her child to—" "Arranged for," Patricia's voice cut across his like a blade. "Mr. Stratton, are you suggesting that a 3-year-old orchestrated her own emotional response for purposes of courtroom theater? That she somehow coordinated with a certified service animal to deliver a performance? That's not an objection. That's a narrative breakdown." Judge Harrison's gavel came down once, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the courtroom. "Sit down, Mr. Stratton, both of you. We're taking a 15-minute recess." The word recess seemed to trigger something in Maya. Her small body, which had been relaxed in the presence of Luna, suddenly went rigid. Her smile disappeared, and her hand, which had been gently stroking the dog's fur, started to tremble. "Mommy," she said, and the word contained more fear than Sarah had ever heard compressed into a single syllable. "Is he taking me away?" The question, asked with such raw, immediate terror, seemed to impact the courtroom in layers. First, there was the shock of a child articulating her greatest fear so directly. Then came the understanding that this fear wasn't random, that this fear was rooted in something, that Marcus had somehow, in the month he'd had custody, convinced his daughter that the threat of abandonment was constant, present, always possible. Sarah's hands moved before her conscious mind could authorize the action. She scooped Maya up, pulled her close, and made a sound that was almost primal, a mother's instinctive response to a child's distress. Around her, the courtroom erupted into controlled chaos. Journalists were already on their phones, undoubtedly calling editors with the headline, "Toddler's courtroom plea reveals custody battle trauma." Alina stood up and moved toward them, but Patricia put a hand on her arm, holding her back. "Let them be," Patricia said quietly. "Let the judge see." And Judge Harrison was looking, really looking, not at the papers in front of him, not at the opposing counsel, but at Sarah Chen holding her trembling daughter in the middle of a courtroom, whispering promises to a child who no longer trusted that those promises meant anything. Officer Martinez had made a subtle hand signal, and Luna did something that wasn't technically part of her training protocol, but that years of experience had taught her to do instinctively. She stood, walked over to where Sarah and Maya huddled together, and pressed her substantial body against them both. The weight of the dog seemed to ground them, to provide a physical anchor in a moment where the entire world felt like it was spinning. Marcus Webb was trying to look sympathetic. Sarah could see him making the calculation. If I appear concerned about my daughter's distress, I appear like a caring father. If I remain unmoved, I appear callous. So he manufactured a look of concern, let a small frown settle onto his face. He even started to stand as if he might approach his daughter with comfort. Patricia saw it too. "Your Honor," she said, and her voice had taken on a quality that was almost dangerous. "I think we need to address something that's become apparent in the last 5 minutes. Mr. Webb's daughter has explicitly stated that she fears being taken away from her mother. She's expressed gratitude to a dog for showing her kindness. And now, as she's experiencing acute anxiety, Mr. Webb is attempting to perform a gesture of comfort for the record." "That's outrageous," Jennifer Chu said, standing with the speed of someone who'd been activated by a threat. "My client has every right to—" "Does he?" Patricia interrupted. "Every right to approach his daughter at will during proceedings. Every right to further traumatize her by reinforcing her fear of abandonment. Every right to continue whatever pattern of behavior has clearly caused her this level of distress." Judge Harrison stood. "Counsel in chambers, now, both of you. Mr. Martinez, please remain with the child." As Patricia and Richard and Jennifer filed toward the judge's private chambers, Sarah sat with her daughter and Luna, and for the first time since this entire nightmare had begun, she allowed herself to feel something other than terror or desperation. She allowed herself to feel something that might have been hope. But it was a fragile thing, this hope. Because even as Maya's breathing began to slow, even as Luna's presence seemed to settle the child's nervous system back into something approaching normal, Sarah understood something fundamental about people like Marcus Webb. They didn't lose, they retreated, they regrouped, they found new angles. And the look he'd given her, that moment where his eyes had met hers as he was making his calculations, had contained something she recognized from their years together. It was the look of a man who'd been backed into a corner and was about to do something unpredictable. 47 days had felt long. But Sarah had a sense that the real fight hadn't even started yet. The judge's chambers. Through the oak door, muffled but audible, Patricia's voice could be heard rising with intensity. "Your Honor, what we just witnessed was clear evidence of parental alienation and emotional manipulation. The child is exhibiting signs of trauma consistent with a pattern of coercive control." Judge Harrison's response came slower, more measured. "Are you suggesting that Mr. Webb has been deliberately frightening his daughter?" "I'm not suggesting it," Patricia said. "I'm stating it as fact. A 3-year-old doesn't develop spontaneous fears of parental abandonment without someone putting those fears there." There was a pause. Then, "I want to see the original psychological evaluation, the one that started this entire proceeding. And I want to know exactly how much contact Mr. Webb's legal team had with Dr. Fields before the assessment was completed." The silence that followed that request was the sound of dominoes beginning to fall. When Judge Harrison re-entered the courtroom after the 15-minute recess, his entire demeanor had changed. The skepticism that had defined his bearing at the beginning of the proceedings had been replaced by something harder, colder, more intentional. He moved to his bench with the deliberation of a man who'd made a decision that would have significant consequences for someone in this room. Marcus Webb was pale. Actually pale, the kind of white-faced pallor that comes from understanding that the situation has fundamentally shifted beneath you. His attorneys were flanking him again, but their body language was different now, defensive rather than aggressive. Jennifer Chu was typing rapid notes on her tablet. Richard Stratton kept checking his phone, as if waiting for instructions from higher up. Sarah remained exactly where she'd been, with Maya curled against her chest and Luna pressed against her side. The dog hadn't moved during the recess, hadn't sought water or shifted position seeking comfort. She'd simply remained, a steady presence, as if she understood that her job wasn't finished. Patricia returned with the look of someone who just received information that changed everything. She caught Sarah's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Sarah's heart began to race. The gesture said, We're winning. Something shifted. We're back on the record, Judge Harrison said, and his voice had taken on a quality that Sarah had never heard from him before. It was the voice of a man who'd been forced to confront his own assumptions and found them wanting. Before we continue with testimony, I want to address something that's come to my attention during our recess. Richard Stratton started to stand, but Harrison silenced him with a glance. The court has become aware that there may have been improper communications between counsel for Mr. Webb and the psychological evaluator, Dr. Nathan Fields, prior to the assessment of Ms. Chen. If this is confirmed, it would constitute a serious breach of ethical protocol and potentially invalidate the entire basis for the temporary custody arrangement. The gallery erupted, not violently, but with the kind of sustained murmuring that courtrooms generate when something seismic has been revealed. Journalists were already making calls. Elena had her hand over her mouth, and Sarah's mother was gripping her husband's arm so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Marcus Webb's face had gone from pale to actively green. Additionally, Harrison continued, and he was looking directly at Webb now, the court has concerns regarding statements that the minor has made to her mother regarding feelings of fear and abandonment. These concerns warrant a brief informal conversation with the child, present counsel, and a neutral observer to determine if there are any immediate safety issues that need to be addressed. This was unprecedented. In most custody cases, judges did everything possible to avoid having children testify or participate directly. There were good reasons for that. Children could be traumatized by being put on the stand, by being forced to choose sides, by having their words weaponized. But Judge Harrison had apparently decided that what had already occurred, the fear Maya was experiencing, the trauma she was exhibiting, made that risk secondary to determining what was actually happening. Your Honor, Patricia said, we believe this is an excellent idea. My client and her daughter welcome any opportunity to provide the court with accurate information about. I don't want Ms. Chen present for this portion, Harrison interrupted. The minor has shown signs of anxiety when in her mother's presence, which may indicate that the child is attempting to manage her mother's emotional state. A conversation with just the child, myself, Mr. Martinez as a neutral observer, and a court-appointed child specialist may yield more accurate information. Sarah's entire body went rigid. Don't let her go. Don't let them take her away. The primal part of her brain was screaming, but Patricia's hand on her shoulder was firm, grounding her. And Officer Martinez was already standing, extending a hand to Maya with the gentleness of someone who'd done this before. Come on, little one, he said. The judge wants to talk to you about your puppy friend here. Luna's going to come too. Maya looked at Sarah, and in that moment, Sarah saw the full weight of what 6 weeks of custody with Marcus Webb had done to her daughter. She saw a child caught between loyalty and self-preservation, between wanting to please her mother and fearing what might happen if she did, between love and survival. It's okay, baby girl, Sarah managed, her voice barely holding together. You can go. Tell the judge the truth. Just tell the truth. Luna was already standing, and Maya took Officer Martinez's hand. She looked back once, her small face a mask of uncertainty, before they disappeared through the side door that led to Harrison's private chambers. The courtroom was absolutely silent. The wait felt eternal. 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly that Patricia had to grip them to keep her from leaving the bench and following her daughter. And then Maya screamed. It wasn't the scream of physical pain. It was the sound of a child in acute emotional distress, a sound that came from somewhere primal, from the part of the brain that processed fear and abandonment. For a moment, Sarah was on her feet, but Patricia's grip on her arm was unyielding. Let it play out, Patricia whispered. Let them see what she's been living with. The scream lasted for approximately 4 seconds. Then it stopped abruptly, as if someone had turned off a switch. What came next was worse. The sound of a child crying, not dramatically, but with the exhausted, hopeless quality of someone whose nervous system had finally broken under sustained stress. Officer Martinez appeared in the doorway carrying Maya. The little girl's face was blotchy and wet with tears. Luna was beside them, and the dog's entire body language had shifted into what was clearly a crisis response. Her ears were back. Her eyes were fixed on Maya with absolute focus, and she was pressing against the child's legs in a way that seemed designed to provide some kind of grounding stimulus. "Your Honor," Martinez said, and his voice had taken on the careful neutrality of law enforcement. The minor became extremely distressed when asked about her living situation with her father. "She's requested to be returned to her mother." Judge Harrison appeared behind him, and his expression was dark, genuinely dark, the expression of a man who just heard something that had confirmed his worst suspicions about what had been happening in his courtroom. "Return the child," he said quietly. Patricia released her grip on Sarah, and Sarah was moving before consciousness could catch up with instinct. She met Maya halfway across the courtroom, and when she picked up her daughter, the little girl wrapped around her like a vine, her small body convulsing with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her. "It's okay," Sarah whispered, but the words felt meaningless. Nothing was okay. Nothing had been okay for 6 weeks. "Mommy's here, mommy's here." Luna had followed them, and the dog pressed against them both, creating a physical boundary between Sarah and Maya and the rest of the world. It was in this moment, with Sarah holding her trembling daughter, with Luna providing her steady, warm presence, with the entire courtroom watching, that Maya lifted her head from her mother's shoulder. She looked directly at Marcus Webb. And she said 2 words that would echo through the rest of the trial, through news cycles, through late-night talk shows, through custody reform legislation, through the rest of her childhood and into her adulthood. 2 words that couldn't be objected to, couldn't be reframed, couldn't be explained away. "Don't leave." She said it to her mother, but the impact rippled outward like a stone dropped into still water. The message was unmistakable. The implication was devastating. This child had learned that her mother might be taken away, that leaving was a possibility she had to account for, that safety could be revoked at any moment. The courtroom erupted. Not the controlled murmuring of before, but actual chaos. Richard Stratton was on his feet, shouting objections that no one could hear. Jennifer Chu was rapidly typing something on her tablet, sending messages, probably, to Webb's father, likely, to whatever network of power and influence they thought might salvage this disaster. But Judge Harrison's gavel came down, once, twice, a 3rd time, the sound reverberating through the courtroom with the finality of execution. "We're adjourning for the day," he announced. "Mr. Webb will remain available for further questioning tomorrow morning. Counsel, I want all materials relating to the psychological evaluation in my chambers by 8 a.m., and someone get that child some water and something to eat." As court officers began ushering people out, as journalists surged toward the doors to file their stories, Sarah stood in the center of the courtroom with her daughter in her arms and Luna beside her. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt like someone who'd been drowning and had just barely managed to touch bottom. Because the hardest part, she understood now, was just beginning. The healing, the rebuilding, the slow, painful process of helping her daughter understand that the world wasn't a place where love could be revoked, where safety was permanent, where mothers didn't leave. Luna rested her head on Sarah's hip, and Sarah realized that this dog, this remarkable, trained, empathetic animal, had just changed the course of her daughter's life by being present, by bearing witness, by showing up as exactly what Maya needed most, a being who asked nothing but offered everything. Marcus Webb was being escorted from the courtroom by court officers. His perfect suit looked rumpled now. His perfect hair had lost its shine. He looked like what he actually was, a man who tried to win a game at the expense of his own daughter's well-being and had been caught in the act. Sarah didn't feel satisfaction at his downfall. She felt relief that her daughter might finally be safe. The clock on the wall in Judge Harrison's chambers read 6:47. The sun had already set outside the tall windows, and the city lights were beginning to glow across the skyline. Papers were spread across Harrison's mahogany desk in a careful forensic arrangement: psychological evaluations, phone records, email chains, bank statements, and photographs of handwritten notes. Patricia Morrison sat across from him, her expression professionally neutral but her eyes alight with the kind of satisfaction that comes from watching a carefully constructed lie collapse under the weight of truth. Richard Stratton was packing near the window, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in urgent whispers to someone on the other end of the line. Probably Webb's father, probably begging for instructions on how to salvage this. Judge Harrison was reading through the psychological evaluation one more time, his gray eyes moving methodically across each line. The document was dated 6 weeks prior, the evaluation that had started this entire nightmare. The evaluation that had claimed Sarah Chen was emotionally unstable, potentially substance-dependent, and exhibiting signs of narcissistic personality patterns that could make her parenting hostile and self-serving. Every single word was a lie. "Walk me through the timeline," Harrison said, not looking up from the document. His voice had taken on that particular quality that judges developed when they were about to make decisions that would have serious consequences. Patricia pulled out a color-coded chart from her briefcase. She'd prepared for this possibility. Good lawyers always prepared for the moment when the case suddenly shifted from defense to offense. Dr. Nathan Fields conducted the evaluation on February 14th, Patricia began. "What we've discovered through discovery requests, and I should note that we only found this because of a court clerk who recognized the date discrepancy, is that Jennifer Chu met with Dr. Fields on February 11th, 3 days before the evaluation." "For what stated purpose?" Harrison asked. "To discuss the parameters of the evaluation," Patricia said, making air quotes with her fingers. "Unofficially, according to emails we obtained from Dr. Fields' office, she wanted to ensure that certain behavioral questions were asked. She provided him with a list of topics to explore with Ms. Chen." Harrison set down the evaluation and looked directly at Patricia. "That's not just improper, that's potentially criminal." "It is," Patricia agreed. "And there's more. Dr. Fields billed the session with Jennifer Chu to Mr. Webb's legal account, billable hours that were subsequently coded as consultation on case strategy. He was being paid by the defense to bias his evaluation." The room went quiet. Even Richard Stratton had stopped packing. "How much?" Harrison asked. $8,000, Patricia said. "And that's just what we can account for. There may be additional cash payments that don't appear in the electronic records." Harrison stood abruptly and walked to the window. Below, the city continued its evening routines, people going to dinner, heading home, living lives unaware that in a courthouse tower, someone was deciding that the entire foundation of a custody case had been fraudulently constructed. "The Bar Association is going to have a field day with this," Harrison said quietly. "Dr. Fields will lose his license. Jennifer Chu will face disbarment proceedings. And Mr. Webb." He trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. "Mr. Webb committed fraud," Patricia finished. "Knowingly, with intention, using his daughter as a weapon to accomplish it." "And Ms. Chen," Harrison turned back, "what's the damage assessment there?" Patricia's expression softened slightly. "She's been fighting for her daughter's custody for 6 weeks based on a psychological evaluation that was doctored. She's lost her job. She's been portrayed in the media as an unstable parent. She spent money she doesn't have on legal representation. And her 3-year-old daughter has internalized the fear that her mother might be taken away permanently." Harrison moved to his desk and picked up the evaluation again. He opened it to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. It was a section describing Sarah's responses to questions about her work schedule, her social life, her romantic history. "Listen to this," he said, reading aloud. Ms. Chen demonstrated defensive responses when questioned about her employment, suggesting possible anxiety around authority figures. She became evasive when discussing her dating history, which may indicate she is hiding relevant information about her lifestyle choices that could impact her fitness as a parent. He set the document down, with the care of someone handling something toxic. "This is designed to make normal things sound pathological," he continued. "A single mother being cautious about her work schedule, that's anxiety. A woman not wanting to discuss her dating life with a stranger, that's evasiveness. A woman who was nervous because she suspected she was being set up, that's defensiveness." "Exactly," Patricia said. The door to the chambers opened without a knock, and Jennifer Chu entered. Her carefully composed exterior had cracked significantly. Her hair was coming loose from its bun. Her perfectly applied makeup had smudged. She looked, in short, like a woman whose entire professional foundation was collapsing. "Your Honor," she said, "my client would like to make a proposal regarding the custody arrangement." "I'm not interested in proposals," Harrison said flatly. "What I'm interested in is understanding exactly how far this goes. How many times did you meet with Dr. Fields? What instructions did you give him? And who authorized these payments?" Jennifer's face went white. "I'm going to need to speak with my own counsel before I answer any questions." "That's wise," Harrison said, "because what I'm about to do is refer this entire matter to the State Bar Association and to the District Attorney's office. You're going to want a lawyer of your own." Jennifer's hand trembled as she reached for the door handle. "One more thing," Harrison called after her. "You can tell Mr. Webb that we're adjourning for the day, but tomorrow morning he's going to come into my courtroom and he's going to understand that what he's done here goes far beyond a custody dispute. He's attempted to defraud this court. He's manipulated a psychological professional. And most importantly, he's caused documented psychological harm to a minor child in the process." Jennifer Chu left without responding. Once she was gone, Patricia said quietly, "There's something else you should know." "Of course there is," Harrison replied, but there was no anger in his voice, just weariness. "Mr. Webb Sr., Marcus's father, has apparently been financing this entire operation," Patricia continued. "His real estate company has been paying all of the legal fees, and according to documents we found, he was the one who initially suggested the custody strategy." "Suggested it how?" Harrison asked. "In an email to his son that said, 'If you control the child, you control her. Use the legal system. It's designed for men like us.'" Harrison closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, his expression had hardened into something that looked almost like fury. But it was a controlled fury, the kind that judges directed into the law and the legal system rather than into personal outbursts. "Get me everything related to Vincent Webb's involvement," he said. "Every email, every payment, every communication. I want to know if there are other cases where he's used this strategy." "Already on it," Patricia said. She stood, understanding that the meeting was over. "But Your Honor, I want to make sure you understand something. This wasn't just about trying to win a custody case. This was about establishing a pattern of control. This was about a child being used as a tool in a power dynamic between two men." "I understand," Harrison said, "and I'm going to make sure it never happens again, at least not in my courtroom." The next morning, when Marcus Webb walked into the courtroom at 9 a.m., he was alone. No Jennifer Chu, no Richard Stratton, no legal team flanking him with expensive suits and legal briefs. His father hadn't come either. Marcus had apparently been abandoned by everyone who'd encouraged him to wage war on his ex-girlfriend. He looked destroyed, genuinely destroyed. His suit, which had been immaculate yesterday, was wrinkled. His hair hadn't been carefully styled. His eyes had the hollow quality of someone who'd spent the night understanding that their life had fundamentally changed. Judge Harrison entered from his chambers, and the room went absolutely silent. "Mr. Webb," Harrison began, "I have reviewed the materials presented to this court, and I have come to some conclusions. First, the psychological evaluation upon which your initial petition was based has been found to contain significant irregularities that suggest bias and potential fraud. Second, evidence has emerged that you knowingly participated in the falsification of professional testimony. Third, your minor daughter has demonstrated clear signs of psychological distress related to your parenting during the temporary custody period." Webb's attorney, a public defender who'd apparently been assigned to him overnight, was taking frantic notes. "Therefore," Harrison continued, "I am granting primary custody of Maya Webb to Ms. Sarah Chen, effective immediately. You will have supervised visitation only, pending the results of a complete psychological evaluation at the expense of this court. Additionally, I am referring this matter to the State Bar Association and the District Attorney's Office for further investigation." Marcus Webb's face crumpled, not with the theatrical emotion of someone who'd been defeated, but with the genuine breakdown of a man confronting the consequences of his choices. "Your Honor," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I was trying to win." "At what cost?" Judge Harrison asked, and the question hung in the courtroom like an accusation. "At the cost of your daughter's mental health, at the cost of this woman's reputation, at the cost of your own humanity." Webb didn't answer. And Sarah, sitting in the gallery with Maya asleep against her shoulder and Luna resting her head on the bench, finally allowed herself to believe that the nightmare might actually be ending. The story broke at 11:47 a.m., approximately 3 hours after Judge Harrison's final ruling. Sarah knew the exact time because her phone had buzzed with a notification from CNN, and she'd checked the timestamp automatically, still operating in the mode of someone who'd been living by precise increments for 6 weeks. By noon, she had 43 missed calls. By 1 p.m., her email inbox had exceeded its storage capacity. By 2 p.m., she'd stopped looking at any of it. Patricia had advised her to stay quiet. "Let the story tell itself," the attorney had said. "Don't give them a narrative to twist. Just live your life and let the public draw their own conclusions." But the public had already drawn their conclusions, and Sarah was learning a brutal truth about human nature. People didn't want complexity. They didn't want nuance. They wanted heroes and villains, and if you became a hero because of what had been done to you, they would love you fiercely and briefly before moving on to the next tragedy. The headlines were predictable. "Justice served. Mother wins custody battle. An emotional support dog exposes custody fraud," and what this custody case reveals about family court corruption. There were think pieces about family law reform. There were op-eds about toxic masculinity and the weaponization of psychology. There was a petition on Change.org calling for Dr. Nathan Fields' license to be revoked immediately, and it had already collected 47,000 signatures. Everyone wanted to talk about what had happened in the courtroom. Nobody wanted to talk about what was happening in Sarah's apartment. Maya had developed what the trauma therapist, Dr. Linda Foster, a woman in her 60s with gentle eyes and an office that smelled like vanilla, called hypervigilance with dissociative episodes. That was clinical language for, "Your daughter's nervous system has been so damaged by what she experienced that she's no longer responding to normal inputs." She was sleeping approximately 4 hours a night, waking up screaming about being taken away, sometimes unable to recognize Sarah when she woke up. There had been an incident on Thursday where Maya had looked at her mother and asked, "Are you real?" as if questioning whether anything in her world was actually real or if it was all some kind of nightmare she might wake up from. Luna had become more than a service dog. Luna had become a necessity. The animal would lie across Maya's bed at night, providing some kind of physical grounding that helped the little girl sleep for slightly longer stretches. When Maya woke up screaming, Luna would wake up first and begin licking her face, a stimulus that seemed to pull the child back from whatever nightmare her brain was constructing. Sarah had tried to explain this to a journalist from the New York Times who'd somehow gotten her unlisted phone number. "Your daughter is a symbol of resilience," the journalist had said. "Surely you want her story told so that other families—" Sarah had hung up. The calls from social services had started on day 2, 3 separate investigations into whether Sarah could be providing an appropriate environment for a traumatized child. Sarah understood the logic. Her daughter had been through significant trauma. Sarah was her mother. Mothers were sometimes the source of trauma, even if unintentionally. The system had to be thorough. But every knock on her door, every social worker asking to look around her apartment, every form requesting detailed information about her daily routines, all of it sent Maya into episodes. The child had learned that strangers with clipboards meant change, meant being taken away, meant loss. On the 8th day after the ruling, Sarah received a letter. It came by certified mail, and when she opened it, she found herself reading words in handwriting she recognized from trial exhibits as Marcus Webb's own. The envelope was thick, containing multiple documents. At the top was a letter handwritten, the words somewhat shaky as if written by someone in emotional distress. "Dear Sarah, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to believe that I mean what I'm about to say. But I need to write it anyway, because my attorney has informed me that I have legal liability for what was done to you, and more importantly, because I finally understand what I did." Sarah's hands trembled as she continued reading. "I convinced myself that I was fighting for my daughter, that you were keeping her from me, that I was the victim in this situation. But watching her in that courtroom, watching her terror, understanding that I had put that terror there, something broke in me. Not strategically, not calculated, actually broke. The documents I'm enclosing are everything that Jennifer and I discussed, every payment made to Fields, every communication with my father about how to construct this case. I'm providing them to your attorney because you deserve to know every detail of what was done. But more importantly, because I want Maya to know someday that her father was held accountable, that there were consequences, that the adult who caused her pain didn't escape unscathed. I'm going into treatment, psychiatric residential treatment. I've been diagnosed with something that my doctor calls narcissistic personality features with sociopathic tendencies toward family members, which is clinical language for I'm capable of hurting the people I love if it serves my interests. I need to understand why I'm like that and whether I can change. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't expect it. But I'm asking you to please tell Maya that I'm sorry, not in a strategic way, not in a way designed to manipulate her, but as an actual acknowledgement that I hurt her and she didn't deserve that. I failed her, I failed you, I failed myself. Marcus." Sarah read the letter 3 times. Each reading brought different emotions: anger, pity, confusion, a strange kind of respect for the accountability he was expressing. But underneath all of it was a question that Patricia had warned her about. What do you do with someone who's trying to become better? That evening, Sarah sat in her living room with Dr. Foster, who came to their home for sessions now, because taking Maya to an office was too triggering. "He's trying to manipulate you," Dr. Foster said gently. "Even this letter could be seen as a manipulation tactic, an attempt to earn goodwill, to make you see him as sympathetic so that you'll reduce your guard, so that you'll allow contact with Maya." "But what if he's not?" Sarah asked. "What if he genuinely understands what he did?" "Then that's wonderful," Dr. Foster said. "But it doesn't change what happened to your daughter. Understanding your mistakes doesn't erase the harm you caused." "I know that," Sarah said. "But if he stays in treatment, if he actually works on himself, shouldn't Maya eventually have some kind of relationship with her father? Shouldn't I be hopping for that?" Dr. Foster was quiet for a long moment. Luna lifted her head from where she'd been lying across Maya's sleeping form and looked at Sarah, her dark eyes containing something that might have been understanding. "I think," Dr. Foster finally said, "you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't whether Marcus can change or whether he deserves forgiveness. The question is what's best for Maya. And right now, what's best for Maya is knowing that her mother is completely, unambiguously on her side, that there's no complexity, no nuance, no part of her mother that's still evaluating Marcus Webb's character or considering his potential for redemption." "But eventually," Sarah started. "Eventually, when Maya is older, when her nervous system is more stable, when she's had enough therapy to process her trauma, then you can make decisions about whether Marcus Webb deserves a place in her life," Dr. Foster finished. "But not now. Right now, she needs a mother who is her safe place, not someone who's torn between love for her father and protection from him." Sarah nodded, understanding the wisdom of this even as something in her rebelled against it. Some part of her wanted to believe that people could change, that accountability and treatment and genuine remorse could actually heal damage, that her family could be reconstructed into something functional and real. But that part of her was still the same person who'd believed in Marcus Webb 5 years ago. Still, the person who'd thought that love could overcome anything. Still, the person who didn't understand that some damage couldn't be healed by forgiveness because the damage went too deep. "What do I do with the documents?" Sarah asked. "Give them to your attorney," Dr. Foster said. "Let the legal system do what it does. Your job is to be present for your daughter. That's all. That's enough. That's everything." That night, Sarah sat on the edge of Maya's bed, watching her daughter sleep. The little girl's breathing had finally settled into the rhythm of deep sleep. Luna curled protectively around her small body. It was 2 a.m., and Sarah had been awake for 19 hours because sleep was becoming a privilege she no longer qualified for. The media attention was still intensifying. There had been offers from publishers, from documentary filmmakers, from people who wanted to tell her story on a platform large enough that she could make money from her trauma. Patricia had discussed the offers with her carefully, explaining what each one would entail, what level of exposure it would require. Sarah had declined all of them. Because as she sat there, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall, understanding that this child would carry the scars of these past weeks for the rest of her life, Sarah understood something fundamental about victory. It wasn't clean, it wasn't satisfying, it wasn't redemptive. It was just the ability to say, "My daughter is safe, for now, today, in this moment." And that would have to be enough. It took Sarah 3 weeks to make the phone call. 3 weeks of therapy sessions with Dr. Foster, who kept asking the same question in different ways. What outcome would actually serve Maya's long-term well-being? 3 weeks of watching her daughter slowly, incrementally, begin to trust that she was safe. 3 weeks of Luna sleeping across the foot of Maya's bed, the dog's steady presence slowly rewiring her daughter's nervous system. 3 weeks of reading Marcus Webb's letter over and over again, analyzing it for signs of manipulation, for signs of authenticity, for something to anchor her decision to. Patricia had been unambiguous about it. "Don't," she'd said when Sarah had mentioned the possibility. "Don't contact him. Don't engage with him. Don't give him a path back into your lives. He lost that right." But Sarah had spent her entire professional life as a nurse understanding something that lawyers and judges sometimes missed. People who recognized their damage and sought to repair it were rare, valuable, worth the risk. The question wasn't whether Marcus deserved forgiveness. The question was whether Sarah, for her own sake, for Maya's sake, for the sake of breaking a cycle, could extend the offer of accountability in a way that didn't require her to minimize what had been done. She called Patricia's office at 8:47 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. "I want to decline pressing criminal charges," she said without preamble. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, "Sarah, I need you to understand what you're saying. You're talking about immunity for fraud, for witness tampering, for deliberate psychological abuse of a minor." "I understand," Sarah said, "but I want him in treatment, real treatment. I want him to understand what he did and why. And I want the legal system to make it clear that the consequence isn't prison, it's accountability. It's having to look at himself." "He's already in treatment," Patricia pointed out. "The residential program, that's happening." "I want it to be court-mandated," Sarah continued. "I want the judge to order it as a condition of not pursuing charges. I want him to know that his freedom depends on his willingness to change." Patricia's voice shifted, becoming less argumentative and more clinical. "Walk me through your reasoning." "Because," Sarah said, and her voice was steady now, "my daughter is afraid of abandonment. She's afraid that people she loves will be taken away. If I pursue criminal charges, if I help put her father in prison, I'm not just punishing him. I'm confirming to Maya that love leads to separation, that mothers can destroy fathers, that the world is a place where people you care about disappear." "That's not your responsibility," Patricia said. "You're not responsible for redeeming Marcus Webb." "No," Sarah agreed, "but I am responsible for healing my daughter. And I think there's a chance that if Marcus actually does the work, if he becomes someone different, Maya might eventually have a relationship with her father that's based on honesty instead of fear. That's not redemption for him. That's survival for her." Patricia was quiet for so long that Sarah thought the line had disconnected. "I need you to understand something," Patricia finally said. "If you do this, people are going to judge you. They're going to say you're weak, that you're rewarding his behavior, that you're not a good victim because good victims don't forgive." "I know," Sarah said. "And you're still doing it." "Yes," Sarah said, "because good mothers don't get to choose the easy path. We get to choose the path that serves our children, even when that path is messy and complicated and doesn't look like what everyone else thinks it should look like." 9 months later. The nonprofit had started as an idea born from desperation and evolved into something that Sarah couldn't have predicted. The Emotional Response Canine Foundation was designed to identify, train, and place certified therapy dogs with families in contested custody situations. The mission statement was simple: to ensure that the voice of traumatized children cannot be overlooked or manipulated by adults invested in legal victory over child welfare. Sarah had secured initial funding from an unexpected source. Vincent Webb Sr., Marcus's father, had made a significant donation to the foundation as part of his own court-mandated settlement. The irony of using money from the man who'd engineered the original fraud to fund the systems that would prevent similar fraud from happening again was not lost on anyone. Luna had become the foundation's symbol and training model. She was 8 years old now, graying slightly around the muzzle, no longer working full-time but serving as a mentor to the younger dogs being trained. Officer Martinez had become the foundation's director of canine services, bringing decades of expertise in matching dogs with families who needed them. But the most unexpected development was Marcus Webb's involvement. He'd completed his court-mandated residential treatment program. The psychiatrist who'd evaluated him had documented genuine progress, not the kind of performative change that cynics suspected, but actual neurological recalibration of his reward circuitry, his ability to empathize, his understanding of how his actions had affected others. He'd spent 6 months in a program designed for men with narcissistic personality features, learning to recognize manipulation patterns in his own thinking. And then, in what might have been the most controversial decision Sarah had ever made, she'd hired him. He worked for the foundation as an administrative assistant, a position that Sarah had specifically designed to be visible enough that everyone could see he was trying, but humble enough that it didn't represent a return to power. He processed paperwork. He updated databases. He attended training sessions and learned about the trauma responses of children who'd been caught in custody disputes. Most importantly, he spent time around Luna. The dog treated him the way she treated everyone, with patience and apparent unconditional acceptance. But Sarah had noticed something interesting in their interactions. Luna seemed to know who Marcus was, seemed to understand that this was the human whose actions had harmed Maya. And while Luna treated him with kindness, there was also a kind of clarity in her behavior, an understanding that kindness and accountability could coexist. It was this dynamic that had inspired Sarah to propose the Foundation's most ambitious program yet. Therapy sessions where men like Marcus, fathers who'd caused psychological harm through custody disputes, through manipulation, through weaponization of their children, could work alongside therapy dogs while processing their actions with a specialized therapist. The theory was simple. Dogs didn't care about legal arguments or justifications. They responded to truth, to intent, to emotional authenticity. A man sitting with a dog, working through the understanding that he'd hurt his own child, might finally achieve something that years of traditional therapy couldn't unlock: genuine remorse. Maya, 84.5. She was doing better, not recovered. Trauma this deep didn't have a recovery timeline, but better. She was sleeping through most nights. She was attending preschool. She was starting to ask questions about her father that weren't rooted in fear. "Is Daddy still sad?" she'd asked Sarah one morning out of the blue. Sarah had sat down beside her daughter at the breakfast table and given the question the consideration it deserved. "I think Daddy is learning how to feel things differently," she'd said. "He hurt us when he was being controlled by anger and wanting to win. Now he's learning that winning isn't as important as being honest, and being honest makes you sad sometimes because it means seeing what you've done." "Is he going to hurt us again?" Maya had asked, and the question contained both fear and hope. Hope that the answer would be no, fear that it might be yes. "I don't know," Sarah had answered, and she'd chosen honesty over reassurance. "But what I do know is that I'm going to be very careful about protecting you, and I'm going to pay attention to what he does, not just what he says. And if he ever hurts you again, I'm going to stop it immediately." Maya had nodded, understanding on some level that this was the best promise her mother could actually make. The documentary. A filmmaker named Jessica Torres had approached Sarah about documenting the Foundation's work. Sarah had been resistant at first, but Torres had made a compelling case. The story of how Luna had changed a custody case wasn't just about one family. It was about a system that needed to change, about children's voices being heard, about the possibility of redemption for people who were willing to do the work. The documentary had premiered at Sundance Film Festival, and to everyone's surprise, it had won the Audience Award. But the most impactful scene wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the Foundation's training facility, where Marcus Webb sat on the floor with a young golden retriever named Hope, working through one of his therapy sessions. The filmmaker had captured him at the moment he broke down, the actual moment when he understood, viscerally, that his actions had caused lasting harm to his daughter. It wasn't exploitative, it was honest, it was a man confronting himself. And in response, Hope had done what trained emotional response dogs do. She'd pressed her body against his, providing grounding and presence without judgment. The audience had been silent watching that scene, and Sarah, sitting in the theater, had felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, she'd already extended that offer, but confirmation that the path she'd chosen, the difficult and complicated and deeply unpopular path, had been the right one. Not for Marcus, not for the narrative, but for Maya. Because her daughter had watched her mother extend grace to the man who'd hurt them both, had watched her mother hold a hard boundary while also believing in the possibility of change, had learned, in the most profound way possible, that love and accountability could coexist. That forgiveness wasn't weakness. That it was sometimes the hardest thing a person could do. Maya was 5 years old now, almost 6. She was small for her age. The pediatrician attributed it to the stress she'd experienced during the custody battle, to the months when her nervous system had been running on constant hypervigilance. But she was thriving in ways that mattered more than physical measurements. She'd stopped asking if her mother was going to leave. She'd stopped having nightmares about being taken away, though Dr. Foster had warned that such dreams might return during adolescence, during other moments of stress or transition. She developed genuine friendships at her new preschool. She laughed. She played. She asked questions about the world that had nothing to do with fear. The supervised visitations with her father had been gradually reducing in structure. The court still required a neutral observer present. This would continue for another year at least, but the atmosphere had shifted. Marcus had become someone Maya was beginning to know as a person, not just as a source of fear. On a Tuesday afternoon in late spring, Sarah watched from across the observation window as Maya and Marcus worked together on a puzzle. The little girl was directing her father with the unself-conscious authority that 5-year-olds possessed. "Daddy, that piece goes in the corner. The corner has straight edges. This is straight." She pointed at the cardboard piece with absolute certainty. Marcus was listening. Actually listening, not performing listening. His face contained a kind of peaceful resignation that Sarah had come to recognize as the look of a man who'd accepted that he would never again be the primary figure in his daughter's life, that he would be forever secondary, that the trust he'd broken would require a lifetime to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. And he was okay with that. Not happy about it, but okay with it. There was a difference. Luna lay on the floor near where they worked, her graying muzzle resting on her paws. She was 12 now, past the age when most service dogs retired, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to remove her from active duty. The dog had become the thread connecting all of them. Sarah and Maya, Marcus, the foundation, the countless families who'd been helped by the work that Luna's original courtroom intervention had inspired. Officer Martinez was standing in the corner, as he'd done for hundreds of these visits, his presence comforting rather than intimidating. He'd become a friend to all of them, not in a way that blurred professional boundaries, but in the way that people who'd been through something significant together sometimes became bonded. "She's doing well," he said quietly to Sarah, who'd come to observe this particular session. "She is," Sarah agreed. "I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the trauma to resurface in some unexpected way." "It probably will," Martinez said, and his honesty was one of the things Sarah appreciated most about him. "Trauma doesn't go away. It just integrates. She'll probably struggle with trust in romantic relationships someday. She might have anxiety around separation. But she'll also have something that a lot of people don't have. A mother who fought for her, who set boundaries, who refused to use her as a weapon, and who eventually showed her that even people who cause harm can choose to do better." Sarah nodded. She'd heard similar sentiments from Dr. Foster, who'd continued to see Maya weekly and Sarah bi-monthly for ongoing support. The work of healing never really ended. It just transformed. The nonprofit's expansion. The Emotional Response Canine Foundation now operated in 14 states. They trained 73 dogs and placed them in active custody dispute cases. The success rate was remarkable, not because the dogs solved anything, but because they provided objective data about a child's emotional state that couldn't be manipulated or argued away. In 3 separate cases, the presence of therapy dogs had exposed fraudulent psychological evaluations. In 2 cases, it had prevented parental abduction. In 1 case, it had actually facilitated a genuine reconciliation because the dog had responded positively to both parents, indicating that the child wasn't traumatized by either one. The real issue was the conflict between the adults, not the quality of either parent's care. The foundation had also begun offering training programs for courts, for custody evaluators, for therapists. Sarah had become something of an unexpected expert in the field, speaking at legal conferences and family law seminars. though she always credited Luna and Officer Martinez with the actual innovation. But the most significant work was the therapeutic program that Marcus had helped design, the Father's Accountability Project. It was controversial. People called it soft on crime. Advocates for abused women saw it as letting men off easy. Sarah received letters weekly from women who'd been harmed in custody disputes, asking how she could possibly be helping the man who'd hurt her daughter. Her response was always the same. I'm not helping him. I'm protecting other children by giving their fathers a path to actually understand what they've done. The program was rigorous. 24 weeks of intensive therapy, working alongside trained therapy dogs, processing the specific ways that men had weaponized custody, used psychological evaluation systems, and harmed their children in the pursuit of legal victory. There was no graduation ceremony, no completion certificate, because the work never actually finished. It just became part of who you were. 63 men had completed the program. 62 of them had shown measurable improvements in their ability to empathize with their children and to relinquish the need to win custody disputes. One had dropped out, and he'd returned to his original custody arrangement, which resulted in the child being removed from his care by Child Protective Services 6 months later. Even failure data was useful. The documentary impact. Jessica Torr's film, titled Luna's Verdict, had been nominated for an Academy Award. It hadn't won. A film about environmental conservation had taken the statue, but the nomination had elevated the conversation about custody court reform in ways that Sarah hadn't anticipated. 3 states had passed new legislation requiring psychological evaluations to be conducted by court-appointed evaluators, with no contact from either attorney before or after the assessment. 5 states had begun pilot programs similar to the Emotional Response Canine Foundation, and there were ongoing discussions about creating national standards for custody evaluation ethics. The film had also resurrected interest in Marcus's case, which meant that there had been documentaries within the documentary, analyses of his journey, think pieces about whether his redemption was genuine or performed. Sarah had learned not to engage with any of it. The narrative belonged to the public now. What mattered was what she and Maya and Marcus knew to be true in the privacy of their actual lives. Luna's final season. In late summer, Luna developed a limp. The veterinarian diagnosed degenerative joint disease, common in older dogs, and prescribed pain management and reduced activity. Sarah began the difficult process of preparing Maya for the reality that Luna wouldn't live forever. Everything dies, Maya had said matter-of-factly when Sarah explained that Luna's body was getting older. Grandma said that. Yes, Sarah confirmed. Everything that lives eventually dies. That's part of being alive. I don't want Luna to die, Maya said, and there was sadness in her voice, but not the panic that such statements would have triggered 2 years earlier. This was normal childhood grief, not trauma-activated terror. I know, Sarah said. Neither do I, but what we can do is spend good time with her while she's here. We can remember all the things she did for us. We can be grateful that we had her. Over the following months, as Luna moved more slowly and spent more time resting, the family created a ritual. Each evening, they would sit together, Sarah, Maya, and Luna, and tell stories. About the day Luna came to the courtroom, about how the dog had known what Maya needed before anyone else understood it, about all the other families that Luna had helped, all the children whose voices Luna had carried when no one else was listening. Marcus participated in some of these sessions, sitting on the floor next to Maya, scratching Luna's ears, and sometimes, when the emotion overwhelmed him, allowing himself to cry. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you when you were scared, he'd tell Luna, as if the dog was a proxy for his daughter. And Maya, in the unself-conscious way of children, would accept both his presence and his grief without judgment. She understood on some level that transcended logic that her father was trying. That effort mattered. that people could hurt you and still be worth keeping in your life. The actual ending. On a morning in late November, Luna didn't wake up. She'd been declining for weeks, eating less, sleeping more, her breathing becoming more labored. Dr. Foster had prepared Sarah for this. Officer Martinez had prepared Sarah for this, but preparation and reality were different things. Sarah held her daughter while she cried, not the panic attacks that used to come, but the clean, uncomplicated grief of a child who'd loved something and lost it. They buried Luna in the backyard, under the oak tree. Marcus came to the funeral. So did Officer Martinez and Dr. Foster and Patricia Morrison and Jessica Torres and several other families whose lives Luna had touched. No one tried to make it seem less painful than it was. No one offered platitudes about heaven or living on in memory. They just stood together, united in the understanding that they'd known an extraordinary creature, that her life had mattered, that her presence had changed the trajectory of all of their lives. Afterward, Sarah sat in her living room, emotionally exhausted in the way that only grief could create, and she thought about the journey, about the 47 days of the custody battle, about the 2 words that had stopped a courtroom, about the years of healing that had followed. The case had been won, the fraud had been exposed, the system had changed, incrementally but measurably. Luna had become a symbol, Sarah had become an advocate, Marcus had become something that seemed impossible, a man genuinely working to understand and amend his harm. But the actual victory wasn't any of those things. The actual victory was Maya, sleeping peacefully in the next room, her nervous system finally calm enough to sleep without night lights. It was a daughter who trusted her mother. It was the understanding that healing wasn't about defeating an enemy. It was about transforming yourself into someone who could move through the world with integrity, even when the world was broken. It was Luna who taught them all that truth couldn't be hidden behind legal arguments. That presence mattered more than words. That sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply show up, without judgment, offering the only thing you truly had to give, your calm witness to someone else's pain. The sun was setting outside her window, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In 2 days, Sarah would return to the Foundation's office. The work of protecting children in custody disputes would continue. The training of new therapy dogs would continue. The slow, incremental reform of a broken system would continue. But tonight, Sarah allowed herself to simply grieve, to honor Luna's passing, to understand that sometimes endings weren't really endings at all. They were just the beginning of the next chapter. And in that beginning, in that moment of loss and transformation, Sarah finally understood something that she'd been too busy surviving to comprehend before. Justice wasn't about winning. It wasn't about punishment or vindication or proving that you were right and someone else was wrong. Justice was about creating a world where the next child didn't have to experience what Maya had experienced, where the next mother didn't have to fight as hard, where the next family could be protected not by a dog, but by a system that had finally learned to listen to the voices of children. Luna had shown them how. Now it was up to all of them to continue the work. The end.